if I was to give this brass library a rating, and bear in mind I am a composer for quite a few years now, but I am not an expert in these kind of libraries, but I do have very sensitive ears to noise and ways sounds are shaped. So if I was to give it a rating out of, say, 10, I think I would give it a 9 out of 10. I think there are some elements in which it could improve or sound better, but it still has a very nice sound. Hi there, Gershom from dekoningtan here. I am doing something a bit different. I've actually never done this, so this is my first time. I am going to be reviewing a library from Spitfire, the Grand Brass library, or Grand Brass library, because basically I just had a baby. Well, my wife had the baby. I was there with her. And so this means that for the foreseeable future, doing the more complex videos with a lot of composition is not going to be as easy for me. So without further ado, I'd like to talk about Grand Brass. So the number one complaint I heard even before I got this library was people were saying, oh, it's got a very limited range. And to which I think, well, yes, it's like lower brass horns and such. So that wasn't particularly surprising to me. Therefore, a bit of a moot point. Here we go, rolling again. My camera just fell over. Besides that one major complaint about the range, the other thing that I've heard some people griping about is the fact that the brass doesn't quite meet their expectations of what they think brass should sound like. So a lot of these people seem to be looking for this type of brass. Or this type of brass. So this is your typical very aggressive sounding brass. I would say that this library is not for that kind of brass, and that's actually exactly what got me interested in it. The idea of this soaring and, yes, very grand, not aggressive, but grand brass. So in that sense, they named the library very aptly, in my opinion. Okay, the first thing I wanted to do was just to show the whole thing in its most simple form. So just going through all the settings, just so you can hear out sounds. And at the end, I have just a very familiar tune, which I think this kind of brass sounds good for. So you can see here that my key switches, I've moved them up. They're actually on C0, actually C-1, but my keyboard's quite small. So I've moved those. You can move those, so that's handy. You can set the amount of round robins you want, and you can reset them as well. And you can reset them from a key as well if you want, and you can also change your layering if you want, and the way that you do that. So that's cool. Those are all handy extra things. This is legato. Louder. What I was talking about, that some people dislike that the brass doesn't get aggressive, so it doesn't go in your face. It still rings clear, and that's exactly what I like about it. Okay, so that's legato. So legato, if for those of you that don't know, it's when you can hear the note switches as they move towards those notes, which means you can only play one note at a time. See? But if you switch to the long version, you can hear the multiple samples if you want to create more of an ensemble feeling. So that's the long setting. Here you have staccato. And here's what I love most about this. The Abbey Road studios where they recorded, it's drier than a lot of their other libraries. The reverb is not as intense. And you can also set the tightness, which I've loosened a lot. To lower it all the way, it kind of does, can remove realism. But the fact that you can mess around with the tightness. And the reverb isn't as intense, which I really like about it. On the staccato, you can still hear some of it. You're still hearing some of that reverb is because of the mic setting I have. So I'm currently on a mix 1. But if you change the positioning, which you can also do, if you simplify this to simple, here you bring the mics. You're using the much closer mics. You can hear that reverb is much more subtle and far away. And the more reverb there. So those are things you can mess with. You can go to a simple setting like this, where you just bring the mics close and far, which is nice for simple usage. Or if you want to be more specific and choose which mics you're using, there's vintage mics, there's pop sounding mics. You can get the sound to sound real center in your mix, or spread it out nice and wide. And I like those options as well, because in when you're composing, sometimes you want to do things that don't sound like an orchestral ensemble. And having that option to change it to more of a pop sound is great, and having the option to change the positioning in the actual instrument itself is great, because it means you're using actual mic locations. So yeah. So here we have tenuto. This is great for those little bit, it's not quite as short as the staccato, but you know, often a lot of libraries that have these beautiful long sounding tones, their short tone is just a bit too short to work, and this is a nice in between. Here we have swells. You got short swells, and you got medium swells. If you want to get more of that Brahms effect. But again, it's more subtle. It's not in your face. To me, it gives the idea that danger is lurking from far away. It's not there yet. And long swells. And this is the setting, Soaring Legato. They added the cellos in. So the Soaring Legato is really nice to have that beautiful movement. And that's why I said the library sounds quite grand. And here you have a soaring long if you want to do combined notes where it's not legato. Cool. So a couple other things to look at. So you can change the effects over either in the effects tab or here. You can see all the options. Super simple, easy interface. Okay. You can see different mics that you can try messing around with to get the sound that you want. Vintage mic sounds different. So all the mic settings, you guys can play around with yourself. And you can also mix them in differently or just the mix that they have, which already sounds fantastic. So all in all, it's really nice. And I told you earlier I would show you how I think this kind of grand brass is supposed to be used. And it's not supposed to be used for this in-your-face aggressive sound. It's not. I don't think it was ever intended for that. It's got a much softer and flowing feeling to it, and that's, I think, what makes it really nice. So that's what I think it sounds good for. So that's what I think it sounds good for. This kind of Star Wars, the Force theme kind of sound, or a Lord of the Rings kind of sound. So think John Williams or Howard Shore, essentially. So in review, a 9 out of 10, I think, for this library, considering the price, the bang for your buck is pretty great. Besides that, the different mic positions are a great selling point for me, as well as the different options that you get within the library. For this price range, it just has quite a good mix of things, and that's why I give it a pretty good review.